Okay.
Oh, yeah.
There's the light, so I guess that's our cue to get started. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And it's so lovely to be in person. One of the things I'm looking forward to is not telling people, please unmute. I think it's time for you to unmute. We can just speak to one another in person. So welcome to our session today, Increasing Capacity at Your Library. Is collaboration always the answer? And I'm delighted to be here with colleagues. We're gonna just take a moment and introduce ourselves before we get started. So I'll start. I'm Marilee Prophet. I'm the Senior Manager for the OCLC Research Library Partnership in OCLC Research, and delighted to be here as moderator for today's panel. Brian.
And I'm Brian Lavoie. I'm a senior research scientist with OCLC Research. Also delighted to join my colleagues here today.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Peter Collins, Director of Resource Sharing at OCLC, and have been with OCLC around 3 years now and have about 20 years of experience in resource sharing at primarily academic libraries and consortia.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kathy King. I'm the Executive Director of Delivery Services. That's on the product team. I'm also delighted to be here in my old stomping grounds. So I went to the University of Pittsburgh and just so happy to be back here in person.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's start out by talking about collaboration and why it is important. And Brian, since you have written so much about collaboration in libraries and beyond libraries, I will start with you.
Well, I guess my first point would be that collaboration has always been important for libraries. It's kind of in their DNA, and in many ways it's the favored way of getting things done and advancing the library mission. But I think that recently there's been some shifts and trends that have really underlined that point and also served to validate its continued relevance. And you know, I think the first thing is the pandemic, of course. Over the last few years, libraries have seen the importance of relying on and working with partners to address unexpected challenges and even crises. And COVID certainly had its share of those. We did a study in OCLC Research called the New Model Library, where we interviewed global library leaders about their experiences during the pandemic. And one theme that really came out of that was that you know, the importance of collaboration, you know, through consortia, through peer networks, and so on. The importance of that as a way to navigate the pandemic. Now, hopefully, the pandemic was a rare and unusual occurrence, but collaboration is also a great strategy in areas of emerging interest to libraries, where perhaps the library role, the technology, the expectations are all very fluid, and there's a lot of uncertainty. You think of areas like research data management, research information management, bibliometrics, and research impact services. These are all areas where there is a lot of uncertainty about the library role, and collaboration can be a great way to approach that. We're doing a study looking at academic libraries partnering to create capacity in the research data management space, and they really felt that that was a great way to address this area. Collaboration can be very useful for just the long-standing trends and pressures that libraries find themselves under, and that might interfere with the library's ability to carry out its mission. We see this in another study we've done with art libraries, where they're looking at collaboration as an approach to navigate their way through pressures such as budgetary crunches, pressures on physical space, and so forth. You know, we often think about collaboration as a way to remove redundancy, to build scale, reduce cost, but it's also a great way to leverage complementarities, pooling strengths and building shared resources that are greater than the sum of the parts. And you know, we see this quite a bit with our work that we've done with collective collection analysis. It's amazing, you know, when you aggregate the collections of a group of institutions, you know, how each institution has some unique strength, some unique contribution to make to the whole. You know, one of the things that we say about that work is rareness is common. Everyone has something to contribute, and collaboration really brings that out. And then the last point I'll make is that collaboration is important because even though collaboration, we look at it as being between institutions, it really builds relationships between people. It expands professional networks. It strengthens professional relationships. It encourages knowledge sharing, and it builds trust. Our colleague and former OCLC Vice President of Membership and Research, Lorcan Dempsey, did a blog series a few years ago about library consortia, and he called this aspect of collaboration the soft power of consortia. And it's a great reminder that collaboration is just as much about people as it is about institutions. So.
Thanks, Brian. Peter, I'm going to turn to you next, since you're next down the line there. What does collaboration look like on the ground from your perspective working with the resource sharing community?
Yeah, I mean, I really liked what Brian was saying about relationships and working in resource sharing. It's amazing how fertile a ground resource sharing is for collaboration. And I challenge any of you to go and, if you aren't the interlibrary loan librarian, to go into the office and ask about who do you have relationships with, who do you borrow and lend to, where is your network? Because I guarantee there's going to be the formal networks that administrators think about for their library, but there's also going to be some very strong connections within resource sharing, and it's the value of that goes back to what you were saying, Brian, about trust, because as we share material and collections, the more trust that's there and the tighter the relationship, the more material we can add to the sharing. I think back to when I first started in resource sharing, nobody lent DVDs or CDs or audio recordings because it was, you know, they just didn't trust that they'd get it back or that it wouldn't be damaged or something. And as we build relationships and build trust, I think there's a lot of that already there innately in resource sharing. And so even libraries that we work with rarely, there's still a trust factor, and the platforms we put in place for resource sharing help deliver or enforce the trust in the relationship. But as we get tighter, as we think about collaboration and building the collaboration, the libraries that we work even more closely with, we can build on those relationships, which builds on that trust and opens the door to more material, more consistency for library users as that material is shared between libraries, because there's also that trust factor from our library users. And when it comes to resource sharing, they want some sense of when can I have this material, and collaboration is a good way to help bridge that network, bring consistency to collection sharing and the collective collection mission.
Thanks, Peter. Kathy, one of your superpowers, I think, is that you come from outside libraries. So I think that on our panel, I was joking that we have something like a collective 90 years of experience with libraries between Peter and Brian, who I think was born at OCLC, and myself. But you come more recently, and I think while it's a strength to have worked in libraries for a long time, that you can get that really tunnel vision perspective. So you bringing a different perspective is something that I really value in you as a colleague. So I'm wondering I know you've talked about kind of how remarkable this collaboration is in libraries and how it's really different from what you see outside of libraries. So if you could just expand on some of the things that we've talked about.
Sure, yes. And then I would just add that I have been with OCLC for 7.5 years, so I add a little bit to that 90 years of experience, I think. So collectively, we're almost 100
Almost
years?
100
Almost 100 years old. Look at that. So ever since you asked me to consider this question, Marilee, I've been reflecting upon my early days at OCLC. 7.5 years ago. And I remember being completely fascinated by things like the Resource Sharing Network. As you were talking, Peter, I was getting so excited because it's so amazing to me to see that DNA built into the library industry and that collaboration piece. So much so, I was so fascinated by this that when people would ask me, my old colleagues, I come from e-commerce and retail, they'd say like, well, what's it like at OCLC? It's a completely different change for you. I would talk all about this collaboration piece. It's so different. So in other industries, of course, you've got this buy, build, partner discussion whenever there's a big decision to be made. I think partner is listed last because it's kind of the last resort in some cases because there's such a high bar. There's a competitive nature. Trust is not as easy to come by, that sort of thing. So it really is remarkable to see how this is built into workflows and the DNA of libraries. We all read those articles about eBay or Airbnb being the first people to kind of say, oh, we built a sharing economy platform. And I think people get it wrong when they attribute that to those companies. I think it was libraries that did that first. We've been doing resource sharing. OCLC resource sharing has been around for what? 40 years?
44.
44. Oh, 44. That's amazing. Yeah. So yeah, this is really a superpower, I think, of libraries. And what I love about this conversation is you read about how you should really lean into your strengths. If you work on your strengths, there's more power there. So this conversation is talking about how can we do something that libraries are already really great at and get even better and more efficient and more strategic. So that's my perspective.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you for asking.
So collaboration, of course, is not something that you just set and forget. Brian, in the report, Library Collaboration as a Strategic Choice, a core theme is that concept of strategy. So what can libraries consider when they're thinking about collaboration as a strategic choice?
Well, the idea of collaboration as a strategic choice, well, it actually comes from Lorcan Dempsey again, something he wrote a while ago, where he made the point that collaboration is usually hard, but effective collaboration is much harder. And the reason for that is to make collaboration successful, you have to invest in it. You have to invest staff time, effort, resources, and so on. So there's a real cost of collaborating. Now, there's lots of benefits as well, and I talked about a few of those a couple minutes ago. But the point is you can't overlook the cost of collaborating. And there's also trade-offs as well. So, for example, you might have to give up some local autonomy if you want to work through collaborative arrangements. So like everything else, there's pros and cons to collaboration. So what you need to do is consider the options available to you, whether it's collaboration or building something yourself or purchasing something sort of off the shelf, so to speak, from an external provider. You have to consider those options, consider your institutional priorities, and then figure out what the best fit is, and then manage the trade-offs that will inevitably follow from that. And that's really a big part of what we mean when we say that collaboration is a strategic choice, or needs to be a strategic choice. Now, making that choice can be quite difficult. So in the report that Marilee mentions, what we do is we try to provide some insight and tools to help libraries make informed decisions about collaboration, choose effective forms of collaboration, and also to help library leaders communicate decisions about collaboration to staff and other stakeholders. So the report has a number of outcomes. One of them is a model which lays out a few basic sourcing options for libraries, including collaboration. And what it does is it contextualizes collaboration as one option among several. And this is to highlight the point that collaboration usually comes up as a choice among a number of different alternatives. Now, to help clarify that choice, the report provides some tools that help libraries identify some of their institutional priorities that would go into a sourcing decision, and then to compare those priorities to the options available, including collaboration, to figure out which one is the best fit. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about making collaboration or any sourcing decision a strategic choice by evaluating pros and cons and managing trade-offs. And then if you do choose collaboration, the report has some additional tools that libraries can use to talk through the features of a collaborative opportunity or an existing collaboration, to try to identify potential obstacles to success, and then hopefully give some ideas for overcoming or at least mitigating those obstacles. So the big message from the report is, again, that collaboration needs to be a strategic decision, and libraries need to figure out whether collaboration, when it's the right choice and when it is not. And I think that this is really important because the question of how you acquire capacity is just as important as the question of what capacity to acquire. And I hope the report brings attention to that question of how to acquire capacity, because the more we talk about it, the better we understand it, the better positioned we are to make strategic decisions about collaboration.
Thanks, Brian. And that's a great reminder. There is a handout on your table. There's pointers to all of the resources that we're discussing, including this report and some other things that we'll be talking about. So be sure before you leave to grab that. So Peter, kind of sticking with this theme of strategic choice, what does this look like in resource sharing, strategic collaboration?
Well, it's really interesting because in resource sharing, libraries are thinking about their collection and how they can augment their collection. Buy versus borrow is the term we've used in resource sharing. And a lot of times I have libraries that they're talking about partners and they're looking around for partners exactly like themselves. So I'm a large A1 research library, academic research library. I'm going to partner with another academic research library. Or I'm a law school. I'm going to partner with another law library, another law school. And I try to sort of, wait, slow down. When you're thinking about collections, you want to partner with libraries that maybe aren't collecting like your library. So as a strategic partner, where can I get the most synergies? Where can I contribute to that library's mission, and where can they contribute to mine? And it really is a little bit of a mental shift that there are reasons to collaborate with like partners, but for resource sharing, it really comes down to how can you serve your library users. And there's an element of, if you're partnering with like libraries like yourself, you get a redundancy of collections. So maybe there's a run on a certain title because a class is focusing on that title. Partnering with a library like yourself, maybe you can source additional copies of that without having to purchase those. So there's an efficiency there, and if that's the need you're seeing the most, then maybe a strategic partner is a library that's just like yourself. But if you're really thinking about how do I diversify my library, no library can own everything. But by partnering with other libraries, and I mean, the resource sharing network as a whole just blows my mind, because a library with a collection of 20,000 items that is part of WorldShare ILL has access to 1 billion items, 3 billion, or whatever the holdings are. The immensity of the connection on the broader network is amazing. But when you're thinking about who do I collaborate with and build efficiencies around distribution of collections, fast delivery between libraries, maybe a courier system, or shared policies around loan periods for physical items, or delivery times for digital copies of articles and book chapters, then you can start thinking about, where are my needs? How do I diversify my collection? How do I make sure my users have access to resources? Maybe again, as using a law school as an example, the core collection is going to be very legal focused, but when students are doing research papers or law review articles, they really need to find out all the information about a certain subject area, even outside of the legal aspect, in order to bolster the opinion there. So when it comes to resource sharing, it's really open up your mind a little bit. Don't just think about, I can only have trust with libraries like myself. I can only think about partnering with libraries just like my library, but really start looking at, where can we collaborate, and how do we look at our collections to find out where that need is.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, I'll just pop in, because I really liked your point, Peter, about looking for partners different from yourself. And I like that because it pops up in collaboration studies in all types of contexts, and you talked about it in terms of collections. And indeed, we've seen in a lot of the collective collection analysis that we've done, that it seems that the benefit from pooling holdings is to expand the boundaries of the collection. It's not for necessarily for load balancing use of the same thing across a group of institutions, but it's to expand the boundaries of the local collection by gaining access to additional materials. But we see the same thing in other aspects, other collaborative efforts. Oftentimes it's to get access to different expertise, different knowledge, different capabilities that are available at partner institutions. So I just want to underline that point, that when you're thinking about collaborative opportunities, look for partners who are different from you. It's amazing the synergies that can come out of that. So.
Speaking of areas of strategic focus, one of the areas that we've been hearing about a lot, I mean, it's an ongoing concern, but curriculum alignment. So the library supporting, especially when there are new or evolving programs on campus, libraries are looking to how can they support and bolster these new, how are the collections already aligning, how can they align? So how can we think about the evaluation of collections in this context, and what is the role of collaboration? And Kathy, I'm going to ask you to kick off this portion of the conversation.
Excited to jump in. I don't think I'm going to stray too far from the resource sharing discussion quite yet, because it was quite powerful. So Peter, you mentioned buy versus borrow. What do we buy versus borrow? It reminds me of an analysis actually that we did last year. We were looking at the OCLC Resource Sharing Network. The question we had was, okay, how much had libraries saved by borrowing on the network versus buying? So we looked at, I think the transactions were from January 2022 to August 2022. So before the fall semester had started, right? We looked at what kinds of types were being borrowed. We looked at average prices for those types. And we saw that libraries had actually saved $100 million by borrowing versus buying. And we took into account things like IFM, if you had to pay for that thing on the ILL network. And we thought that was pretty amazing. The resource sharing network is obviously so important to the collections strategy. It's pretty cool. $100 million. We should have been like 100 million.
Yeah.
$100 million.
So that leads us to the question of like, okay, that's amazing that you can rely on this expansion of the network using the resource sharing network, expansion of the collections using the resource sharing network. So what do I then buy? So we saw the opportunity to use WorldCat and the holdings to allow libraries to make more informed decisions using data. So at this conference, we are actually introducing a new product called Choreo Insights. Has anybody heard about this yet? I see some nods. Yay, okay, good. You have to go check it out at the booth. So Choreo Insights does a couple of things. And one thing it does is help you understand more about your collections. What are the strengths? What are the gaps potentially? And think about what you should buy going forward. Marilee, you asked me about curriculum alignment. I'll get back to that now. So one of the cool things we did was we mapped the LC classification scheme to a higher ed academic classification scheme called CIP, CIP, and I don't remember what it stands for. Peter, do you remember? No.
I don't remember.
No. So basically what it does is it allows you to look at your collection and say, okay, how well do I support, for example, the computer science department? How well do I support the history department, that kind of thing. So it allows you to run analytics on your collections and see that type of thing. It also allows you to compare your collections to other institutions, whether those institutions be in your consortia or potentially those institutions that you've identified that might be complementary, like you were both talking about, right? You don't always have to collaborate with someone who looks exactly the same as you. And it will tell you information about where the gaps are in your collection, help you understand, like I said, what you could buy. So we ran a beta program last year, and I'll just share two examples. We had one library who was able to look at their collection in comparison with a consortium member in a niche area. And basically they said, oh, look at this. My consortium member has a great collection here. I have that academic program on campus. I don't have to buy everything. I can borrow because I can use the resource sharing network. The other thing they did, getting back to curriculum alignment, is while a beta library was using the Choreo Insights program, at the time we were calling it something different, so I'm like, it's Choreo Insights, they were asked by their academic institution to understand how well their library mapped to graphic design, because they were going to be introducing a graphic design program. So they were right then and there able to kind of go in there and say, oh, I see where the gaps are, I'm gonna go collect those things. So yeah, pretty exciting. It's early days for Choreo. We're seeing lots of great use cases, and I'm looking forward to see how this can help libraries choose those partners and be more strategic going forward.
Yeah, thanks. I just think it's amazing that comparing collections when you are doing a new, like a new course, and being able to see, oh, there's this library that I partner with that I can just rely on resource sharing, so I don't have to actually go out and spend all that money on all those resources. Maybe I collect strategically and partner with an institution that has a strong collection in that area, and then resource sharing can do the rest.
Yes, and a lot of the work you've been doing with the team is to make that resource sharing network move faster.
Yeah.
So it really can be like, okay, an extension of my collection, not something I have to wait weeks for, but in some cases for articles, hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
The Express program, it's 10 hours average delivery for articles.
Yes.
So yeah.
You better rein the product people in. It's very exciting.
And I'm missing a question, so I'm going to have to go back to my paper notes here to get to, let's see, where were we?
Data-driven.
Okay, right. So my next question is about how data supports collaboration and collection decision-making. We've already segued into this
Yes.
pretty well with Choreo Insights. And Brian, I'm gonna ask you to come back to the research and talk about how data informed the research for the Sustaining Art Research Library.
Yeah, I really love this report. So the context is the art library community. And so this community is, dealing with the effects of the pandemic as well as some longstanding trends. And these are presenting challenges to institutional sustainability. Now, art libraries recognize that one pathway through these challenges is collaboration. So what we wanted to do in the report is show how data about collections and data about resource sharing patterns can help art libraries identify collaborative opportunities that are mutually beneficial to art libraries and their partners. So we took WorldCat bibliographic and holdings data, and we analyzed the collective collection of 85 North American art libraries. What we wanted to do was identify sort of the salient characteristics of their holdings, and then from that, identify possibilities for collaboration with peers or other types of institutions to support collection stewardship. So for example, the data showed that the art library collective collection is heavily monographic. Well, this suggests opportunities for shared print programs, pooling print holdings, lowering print management costs, and easing pressures on space. We also looked at WorldShare ILL transactions involving art libraries. And one of the things that the data showed there was that art libraries are highly valued partners in resource sharing networks. And in some cases, they're even prolific lenders. The data also showed that art libraries tend to borrow heavily in subject areas outside, the typical art-related classifications. And that suggests opportunities for valuable partnerships with institutions outside the art library community. And I think also that, one of the things that was really important about this study is that it showed the value that art libraries bring to their collaborations based on the specialized nature of their holdings. And this really showed that small specialized libraries have a lot to offer, even vis-a-vis, say, large academics. Because as I said earlier, rareness is common. Everyone has something unique to contribute. And we know this because the WorldCat collections data and the WorldShare ILL data revealed, potential synergies that can bring collaborative partners together. And then just going back to what I said earlier about collaboration being a strategic decision, I think data-driven analytics, like the kind we use in this report, are really helpful for identifying what partners can bring to the table and then how you can translate that into valuable partnerships. In this case, collaboration supporting stewardship of or access to art research collections.
Thanks, Brian. That was another good kind of example of how the the art research libraries really benefit from libraries that are not like them, that they use more of those other types of materials than you would expect given their mission and their focus for
Absolutely.
their clientele. Kathy, what data can inform decision-making around collaboration, and what tools can help with that process?
I think I already started this conversation, right, with Choreo. So I'll just mention briefly. So Choreo Insights is meant to help libraries make individual decisions on their collections in sort of a I always mess this one up, right? Collective context. There we go. Say that 3 times fast.
Yeah.
So basically, by looking at what other libraries have, help them make decisions about their collections, kind of going forward prospectively, is what we like to say. We also have a product called Green Glass. Has anyone done a Green Glass project? A couple of you? Yeah. So this is meant to be retrospective. So look at your print, monograph, and serial collections kind of in the past to say, all right, what can I potentially get rid of? What is unique and should go into a shared print program, that sort of thing. And I love the power of Green Glass. One of the things that the team told me when I first started working with them, it was sort of early days for Green Glass. I think that product has been around for maybe 10, 15 years or so. They had a library come to them, and this was a library in Germany. They had done a weeding project or a deaccession project, and they hadn't used data to inform that project. So basically they said, okay, well these things, they essentially can be removed from the collection safely. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So they had actually removed some very rare medical journals. We talk about rarity is common, right? And unfortunately, these were the last copies in the world. So those were forever lost now. So they came to the Green Glass team and said, hey, we don't want that to happen again, because if they had looked at Green Glass and looked inside WorldCat, they would have seen that those were the last copies. So they should have been moving to potentially preserve those in some way, shape, or form. So I think it just goes to the power of when we kind of collectively put our things in WorldCat, we use WorldCat to unlock different decisions, how sort of impactful that can be. So, not to tell a sad story.
Yeah. Peter, the same question. What data can help inform decision-making, and what tools do we have to help with that process?
Well, I'm really excited because we've been focused on how we can use data and data analytics to actually improve the resource sharing network, for starters. And so we've been doing this in a number of ways. We've launched I mentioned the Express Digital Delivery Program a moment ago, and we looked at the network. It's actually almost been 2 years, which is hard to believe that Express has been up and running. But we looked at the network, and we had over 1,000 libraries that were sharing, delivering digital files between each other in 18 hours or less. And so a lot of that information wasn't exposed to those libraries, though. So they were delivering lending at that dedicated, that speed, but they weren't always getting the consistent response back because it wasn't clear where they needed to go to also leverage the same kind of committed delivery relationship. So we were able to bring those libraries together under the Express program, and now those libraries are seeing the benefit of 10-hour average turnaround time, which basically is same-day delivery a lot of times for the material that the research needs that their users have. So that's been amazing. We also are starting to delve into data on the back end through our automations in resource sharing. So as we build lender strings, or the libraries that we're going to borrow from, that you're going to borrow from, we actually look at the turnaround time. And I compare this sometimes to how Google Maps, if you plug in an address, you were coming here yesterday, or I was, and I was rerouted a couple times due to traffic. We're basically able to do the same kind of thing on the resource sharing network by looking at where can you get efficient delivery, what are the fast delivery times, And then we've taken that to the next level with resource sharing for groups, which is what we're offering consortia. Because when you're working as a consortia, we have even more information about your sharing relationship, your delivery, whether you're using a courier or you've all agreed to use an expedited courier service like a UPS or FedEx. And so we're using the data to inform delivery. And this also is important in the resource sharing for groups, which is brand new. We just launched the webpage for information about it like this week, and we're starting to talk to libraries about it. So if you're part of a very distributed group working together, like I think of like the Big Ten Academic Alliance that's geographically very distributed, we can actually look at libraries that are closer to each other. Maybe multiple copies are owned within the network, but getting the material from the most efficient supplier. So we're reducing the shipping of physical items by knowing what the delivery network is, going to libraries that can get material faster. So we're really trying to think about how do we use data to inform the systems, to connect libraries, and then finally, Kathy alluded to this, but how do you use data then to look at your collaboration and make informed decisions going forward? So as part of resource sharing for groups, we also have an analytics package that comes with that so that you can look at your network and how you're sharing, what types of material, the turnaround times, all the efficiencies, but then also be able to talk about what that collaboration is doing, because sort of like is demonstrated in the art library report, like if you don't really dig in and look at the information, and I love the fact that you use so much resource sharing data as part of that report, but it's being able to then allow consortia to tell their own stories by providing them that information through an analytics package.
That's really exciting. Thanks, Peter. So this has been a really great conversation. I've had so much fun with you guys preparing for this and having the conversation today. This has been really great. Sadly, it's time to wrap up. So I just want to ask each of you what you're most excited about. And Kathy, we'll start with you.
Everything. No. I'm really excited about kind of what I said in the beginning. This is, we've all talked about how this is a strength of libraries collaborating. It's in your DNA. So I'm excited about all of the advancements we've made to unlock data to improve the resource sharing network, introduce Choreo Insights, and I feel like we've sort of just, it's the tip of the iceberg, right? So I'm excited about helping libraries get more strategic about their collaborations and making them more effective. Lots more to come there, right?
Peter.
Well, I mean, I just talked a lot about resource sharing for groups. I'm definitely excited about that. Consortia has been important to what I've done over my career, helping consortia collaborate, build systems that enhance the sharing and really create that shared collection, that collective collection. But I'm also, I jumped in when Kathy was talking about Choreo simply because it's a little out of my lane, but one of the things that has been amazing as I've seen demonstrations of that product is the insight in who I can collaborate with and being able to look at collection level, subject level information about my library and other libraries to start thinking about who do I connect with? Because so many libraries, their collaboration is built around a sports team or like we were talking about, a subject area or the specialization. And I think we need to actually use data like we've talked about to inform those collaborations and think about new partners. And so that really, I think is something I hope others are starting to think about this year is new ways they can gather information about forming collaborations. and then use resource sharing to do it, of course.
Of course.
Of course, of course. Brian?
Well, what I'm excited about is that we're doing some work to extend the two reports that I talked about today. So for the first one, the library collaboration as a strategic choice, we're putting together 3 fascinating case studies of academic libraries partnering to create research data management capacity. And what we're doing is we're taking the insights from the report that I discussed today, and we're applying them to these case studies to see how they play out in practice. And then for the second report, Sustaining Art Research Collections, we're doing a set of 3 more case studies, but this time it's art libraries collaborating with academic libraries. So we're taking a really close look at the motivations for those collaborations, how each of the partners benefit, and then how they make that collaboration successful. And I think that all of these case studies are full of insight and lessons whose relevance really goes well beyond the context from which they were derived, either RDM on the one hand or the art library community on the other. So the report documenting the art library case studies is going to be published in April, which is my goodness, next month. So very soon, so look for that. And then the report documenting the RDM case studies will be following on a little later this year. So look for both of those.
Thanks. I'm excited because we're at the beginning of this conference in a lot of ways. It feels like we've got a couple of days of really great programming ahead of us. I'll be back here tomorrow in this room in 24 hours talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in collection development. I'll be here with some OCLC colleagues and also a researcher from Ithaca SNR talking about our combined research. So looking forward to that. Come back here and join us for coffee and conversation around that tomorrow. And with that, I think we're ready for any questions you may have.